So we've got second grade students here. It's the end of the school year. It's towards the end of the school year. It's the end of May. We've got about 3 weeks left of school. We're looping with the kids next year. So we're going to take a look at the end of year benchmark assessments that we've done with students, in particular with a group that we've been working to accelerate their progress since the beginning of the year. And in this process, we're going to really be able to see what benchmark assessments we've administered, what they're telling us about the students, and we'll be able to use the assessment conversion chart to identify a great place for us to be starting to continue the work that we're doing for the remaining few weeks and where we want to be thinking ahead for next year.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. For the end of the year benchmark assessment for our kids, gave them the decoding benchmark assessment and also the spelling benchmark assessment. And for those were the priority assessments that we gave. And for at least one of the kids, we gave the fluency assessment because we wanted to look a little deeper beyond what we already know about their fluency based on what you're seeing.
Right.
So we've got Rihanna, and I know that at the beginning of the school year, Rihanna was reading at
Early full.
And at this point, when we're looking just at the decoding, we looked at this list here. She's reading 10 out of the 12 words accurately and 10 also with automaticity. So we moved on to the middle consolidated list, and we're seeing here that she's reading 6 accurately and 6 automatically. So she's working right now on patterns that are in the middle consolidated alphabetic phase. We're looking at her spelling, and we're seeing here that she we gave her the full alphabetic list. And do you want to explain your thinking for why we gave her the full alphabetic list and not the consolidated?
Well, just based on observing her in small group, it felt like that was the place to begin. And she was able to spell 8 out of the 12 correctly. So I can see that there's some patterns here that we've learned that hasn't brought into her spelling yet. So like some unique vowel team patterns, bossy R. Here's another kind of unique vowel sound. So that gives me some insight with that group, what I might want to focus on for the rest of the year, because those might be really quick teachers for them. If we look at the assessment conversion chart, and in the beginning of the year, we had Rihanna right about here, early full.
Yep.
And we're thinking middle consolidated now,
based
on this assessment. So would we call that 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, she's moved almost 3.5 microphases since the beginning of the year, because she was working solidly here, where she was reading single syllable short vowel words with 3, 4, and 5 sounds. So she hadn't really gotten to the point of automaticity yet. And that's really important. I think it's important for us to remember whenever we're looking at the benchmark assessments that we're measuring in the decoding 2 things. We're measuring accuracy, but we're also measuring automaticity. And that's just super important because we do want students to be able to be automatic with the patterns that they've learned.
Yeah. So this is exciting for me to see that these were automatic for her.
For sure.
And so how many phases of growth are we looking for the typical student?
We're looking for typical 2 to 3 phases of growth, especially, some of them are going to take a little longer for a lot of kids moving, not all microphases are equal, we found, For some of the kids, it's going to take a while to automatize, say, some of the patterns in the late full, some of the patterns in the late partial. It kind of depends on students, so there's not necessarily a time limit on the research will even show for some kids it'll take 5 exposures to a pattern. For some kids it could take who knows how many exposures to the pattern for them. We looked at where they were. Most of these kids were reading in the full alphabetic, so we identified a cycle of lessons we started on, and you've been moving along with exactly where you started, and you've been moving them through those cycles to get to the point where most of them, I think now, are. What cycle are you on with the kids in this group?
They are on cycle 12 of second grade. Okay.
So just for context, I think you've moved them through all the way through the second half of first grade and are now into cycle 12. You're into halfway through the second grade curriculum with them. Which, when you get to the middle of the second grade curriculum, you're getting into pretty sophisticated patterns. So I think what's been just really powerful, watching how this has unfolded for this group this year is the fact that you start your whole group lesson, with grade level work. You keep that lesson in terms of allowing you to have enough time to meet with all, because you have 4 different microphases happening in your classroom.
Yeah.
And so you're using 4 different cycles when you're going to do your small group differentiated lesson. You've got your grade level group, you've got an above grade level group, you've got a group that's a little bit below grade level, and then you've got a group that you're doing some intensive accelerated progress with.
Yeah, and so I'm hopeful that because she's had the grade level exposure in the whole group lesson, that this group has, that when we move into these upcoming cycles, that there will be some connections to what I've introduced whole group.
So I think just it's nice to know that you've had this whole group time where you've kind of kept the lesson focused and short on grade level work, and then you're able to send the kids out on rotations, and you meet with each of the groups, and you use the cycle based on the assessment conversion chart. Yeah. So in this particular group, you started out with a cycle that was in Module 3 of first grade.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, cool. So as we see more students from this group, we can maybe gauge whether or not I'm in the right place in terms of the cycle that I'm on.
Okay. And in terms of the difference between where they are with their spelling and their decoding, I think that there's some work that we can do in both the independent rotations and working with your table at solidifying some of the vowel team patterns and things like that with the dictations and some of the additional sentences and things like that from the interactive writing, and so that we can kind of solidify some of those patterns. So if we build that into a table routine. In this group, all of them have at least some markers of the long vowels. So it's in terms of kind of distinguishing when to use IGH versus IE, for example.
Right.
But you don't really have any issues, or at least not many, where you've got kids that are not putting a long vowel pattern. Ira is pretty strong with her automaticity with decoding on the early consolidated patterns, so I'm guessing that she's pretty much in the same place as Rihanna. She can benefit from some of that focused work. And then we look at her.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. So she spelled dream D-R-M-E as opposed to D-R-E-A-M.
But then look at short.
Oh, yeah.
S-T-O-T-E.
Huh.
So missed the digraph and the bossy R.
Is that something that you see in her writing in class, or not so much?
Not so much.
Okay.
No. It's really interesting.
Something to keep an eye on.
So maybe we'll move forward with the middle consolidated list?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I think that we're going to need to do some, some focused work on just solidifying some of these vowel teams when it comes to the writing. Maybe go back and look at some of the words rule activities and things like that from Module 1 in second grade.
Okay, words rule Module 1.
Maybe go back and work on some of those for their independent practice.
Yeah.
Dictation. Going back and doing a lot of syllable sleuth practice with them to kind of solidify just some of the recognition of vowel teams and things like that. So the syllable sleuth practice being where you have the 2-syllable words and they know where to, how to locate the vowels and recognize what vowel pattern they are, and then where to divide it and be able to read based on syllable type.
And then I like what you said about that red group, where bringing some practice back into their independent rotation. I'm thinking of Misty Roma.
Right.
So bringing some of those Module 1 vowel teams back in, especially with spelling, syllable sleuth.
Even in your word work time, if you did, say you gave them the word lists from that cycle, and then had them read those word lists, and then had them dictate, some of those words to each other in partners.
Oh, yeah,
they're recognizing that those are the patterns that they're using, so they're just having that much more exposure with them. Daisy, it's I'm just looking back on how the fact that you've monitored these kids so closely with the benchmark assessments And the cycle assessments, because the cycle assessments have given you weekly information that's been allowed you to adjust what you've given them for the independent rotations. But when we look at all of these kids starting out in the early full alphabetic, which we're talking about is kind of like, a good year behind coming in. And they are almost to the point with their decoding in particular, where they're almost reading grade level patterns. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's exciting.
And it's showing up too in their iReady assessments, which is great to have. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about what you did to promote automaticity with this group and with these patterns.
Yeah, well, I think my first go-to was using the word list that came with the cycle. So we would usually what I would do to introduce a pattern was just kind of throw the word list their way and not tell them at all what the pattern was and see if they could kind of figure it out by looking at the patterns. Yeah. And then they would just kind of write a guess what they thought our new spelling pattern was going to be. Yeah. So that was a good way to engage them at the beginning. Naming the list, what you would label it. Yeah, title the list. And then from there, we used things like, the decodable was a great way to get them to practice the patterns over and over. Yeah. Any kind of competition with themselves where they're just seeing how many they can read. Right. And with the really struggling readers, the word hills were really helpful. So taking the word list and then rewriting the word list as word hills to help with that working memory.
Yeah, and so what we're talking about with a word hill is instead of, say, a word like pans, p-ans, sometimes it can be really hard for kids to hold all of that. They might go p-ans and say sap or something, because what's in their mind is the last sound that they heard. Yeah. So when we put this on a hill, where we put the vowel at the top of the hill and all the consonants before it come on the beginning of the hill and all the consonants after, there's something about holding that sound. So p-ans. And so there's something that's activated that just holds that in their working memory. And so that's been a strategy that's been really effective in moving this group forward.
And then on the back side, they're in standard form.
Oh, right. Okay. So the typical word list that you'd see.
Right.
Yep.
And that seems to be super exciting for them when they feel like they're done with the hills and they want to just try it.
Right.
They don't want to go back to the hills anymore. And then a way that I modified it as we moved into the 2-syllable words, I just made 2-syllable word hills. And blew all their minds. Frustrate.
You've seen a big shift with a lot of kids, and I think a couple of things. First of all, in you at the very beginning of the year, identifying this is the cycle based on their benchmark assessments, going back and analyzing and saying, okay, this is the cycle that they need to work on, because this is the pattern that I see where things are breaking down for them in the scope and sequence. Moving them, adjusting. Some cycles you were able to build out over a longer period of time. Some cycles you were able to move through really quickly.
Right. Yeah.
Because they were getting that pattern. You didn't need to do necessarily every single lesson in that cycle.
Yeah, it definitely helped me feel confident, the most confident I've ever felt teaching any type of phonics curriculum, knowing that I was starting at the right place. I knew what was coming up ahead. It was good.
And we see the results.